Happy Saturday. It's January 11th, 2025, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
And we are two of your Airmail editors who are here not to talk about New Year's resolutions, because God forbid we have any of those, but instead we have some stories that you really mustn't miss. But first, what a week it's been in the news. The news cycle has been dominated by the horrific reports coming out of Los Angeles, where it seems like a new blaze is being reported with each passing hour. We have a fascinating and provocative story about that in the issue this week by the architect and USC professor Jeffrey Von Oyen, which we encourage you to read. But in the meantime, Morning Meeting is here to provide a break from the distressing headlines. And with that, Michael, let's get to it.
Yeah, we've got a great show today. First, Mark Zuckerberg announced this week that he was killing Facebook's fact-checking program, blaming it for political bias. But Carrie Monahan, who worked as a fact-checker, will join us with her thoughts on why all she can think is, you are kidding, right, Mark? Then, you may have missed some news on the street recently, Sesame Street to be exact. The long-running series finds itself suddenly looking for a new home on television. Warner Bros. Discovery has opted not to renew its deal with the beloved children's show, and our own David Camp will join us with his look at just where Bert, Ernie, Cookie Monster, and Elmo might end up and its impact in our lives. And finally, the alleged abuse on the set of the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni star-crossed film It Ends With Us was only the beginning of a scandal and multi-million-dollar lawsuits that have now captivated Hollywood. And Stuart Heritage is going to join us with his perspective on this fresh, wild scandal. So Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
I'm sorry, Michael. No story has captivated me with the passion and intensity of Olivia Nuzzi and RFK Jr., quite like the throwdown between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. Let's get Stu Heritage on here to make sense of it. Stu is a writer at large for Airmail based in Kent, United Kingdom, my neighbor. Welcome, Stu Heritage.
Hello.
Hello, Stu. So, wow. Okay, let's start the conversation about It Ends With Us. It ends with us, but this conversation begins with you and your story this week, magnificently making sense of this gigantic multi-million-dollar lawsuit between Blake Lively and the director Justin Baldoni of this movie that came out recently, and it's got all of Hollywood talking. So can you make sense of what's happened and why for us?
It's become so enormous and so kind of multifaceted. To begin with, It Ends With Us is a film that came out last year, directed by Justin Baldoni, who was previously probably best known as an actor on the show Jane the Virgin, and starring Blake Lively, she's been in lots of things. She's Ryan Reynolds' wife. The film came out, did very well, but there were rumors of a rift between the pair of them because they didn't do press together. They didn't pose for photos on the red carpet. Apparently, Justin Baldoni wasn't invited to the after party of his own movie for some reason. There was a sort of an unfollowing on Instagram that got everybody talking because they thought something was up. And it turns out that during the post-production, Blake Lively had sort of commissioned her own edit of the film and showed it to the studio, and they went over Justin Baldoni's head. And that seems to have sparked off this really incredible sort of back and forth that's being played out in sort of smear campaigns, basically, backwards and forwards. So just after the film came out, there was this flurry of news stories and social media posts about Blake Lively just not being particularly nice. She was snippy in interviews that she did, or she completely misread the tone of the film. The film's about domestic violence, but she was kind of treating it like it was a Sex and the City film. She was telling people to wear flowery clothes and drag the girls along, even though it's a sort of a grim domestic violence drama. And it turns out that, according to a legal complaint that she made in December, it was a coordinated smear campaign against her by Justin Baldoni and his crisis PR firm.
So, yeah, as you note in your story, they went on this elaborate press tour, but the director and co-stars of the film, they did not appear on the press tour together. As you note, the internet sleuths then noticed, Blake Lively is not following Justin on Instagram, and that's kind of like a big red flag. And then, of course, as you note, there's this bombshell story that drops in the New York Times, written by Megan Twohey, who won the Pulitzer Prize in part for her work on the Harvey Weinstein case. So at that point, as you note in your story, Lively starts detailing that there's this elaborate smear campaign by Baldoni, right?
Yes, yeah. And there are text messages between the crisis PR people, some of whom worked for Johnny Depp during his big court case against his ex-wife, Amber Heard. In addition to the smear campaign, which is, I mean, it has tendrils everywhere. The sister of one of the PR officers worked at, I think, the New York Post. And so she was feeding anti-Lively stories to the newspaper that way, allegedly. But in addition to that, it turns out that Justin Baldoni had, according to Blake Lively, just been horrible to deal with. There was unrehearsed kissing scenes. He came into a trailer uninvited when she was breastfeeding. One of the producers, it says in the article, showed her a pornographic image of his wife. So it's just a lot of nastiness. And now in response, Justin Baldoni is suing, first he's suing the New York Times for $250 million. And he's also about to sue Blake Lively back. It's just become this extraordinary game of sort of lawsuit tennis, really.
Yeah, well, I think he's saying your story. It's this very high profile, he said, she said. And, right now, Baldoni's the one who's out. The full Kevin Spacey that's happened to him. He's been dropped by his agents. Awards have been rescinded, all under allegedly from the Lively camp, and now he's coming back at her.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see. He's got a very aggressive lawyer who seems to be drip feeding, again, more negative press stories about Blake Lively. There was a very strange recording, and this happened too recently for me to have put it in the piece, a very strange recording of him at the premiere of his film, complaining about being banished to the basement and not being able to mingle with all the other famous people on Blake Lively's orders. So it's very strange, and I think it's going to just carry on being this weird sort of snippy accusation tennis. Yeah.
Yeah, don't you kind of think no one's really going to win? I mean, everything's going to come out. No one's going to look good. You compared it to like Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, right? I mean, they're not a married couple, but no one's going to look good in this, right?
Yeah, it's just so unedifying. At the very least, I think it's going to make both of them look like they're just horrible people to work with. It's going to, at the very least, dent their careers. I don't think either of them can come out of it completely unscathed. At the moment, it seems like Justin Baldoni has the least to lose because he's already been cancelled. So he'll probably, go hell for leather in the courts. It's just a really ugly, ugly thing to watch.
Stu, it's also fascinating how this scandal has engulfed so much of Hollywood. I mean, not only do you have all of these publicity firms and lawyers, but you have lawyers for the publicists and publicists for the lawyers. And Scarlett Johansson is involved because she was married to Ryan Reynolds, who's now married to Blake Lively. But Justin Baldoni is producing her next film. So, I mean, is that the reason that this has captivated Hollywood? Or is this just some greater tale of, the art of the smear, as the New York Times sort of described it, and our fascination with how the media manipulates these stories?
I definitely think it's the latter. And I think that's why at the moment, everybody seems quite reticent to kind of come down on a side, because last year when the smears against Blake Lively were happening, there was a lot of knee-jerk, I read newspaper columns about it, knee-jerk pieces about how awful she was. And then, since the Times piece came out, everyone's going back on that and saying, oh, we're very sorry, we got it wrong, you're good, he's bad. And now he's kicking back. I think people are being a bit slower to kind of reach a judgment because they feel like they're just, whoever's got the loudest publicist is going to win this. That's how it feels at the moment. But you're right, it is also sucking in all these other people from Hollywood. The Hollywood Reporter did a big sort of who's who in the case. And the list was huge. It was, The Rock was in it for reasons that I couldn't quite sort of piece together. Tangentially, he's involved in it somehow.
Well, also, Stu, I mean, one thing it's done is it's piqued the curiosity of everyone who never saw It Ends With Us, which was Michael and I.
I haven't seen it either. And now I'm not sure if I want to, because it cannot possibly be as interesting as everything that's happened off screen.
I'd be more inclined to watch a dramatized version of the Baldoni Lively throwdown than I would be to actually watch the movie that has caused all of this consternation.
That's probably guaranteed to happen. They did that with Johnny Depp, didn't they? With the Johnny Depp trial, they dramatized it very, very quickly with people who looked nothing like anyone who was involved in it. And it was bad. And it's been forgotten about now. But yeah, there'll be on some horrible streaming service. There'll be a true crime version of all this going down at some point.
Well, Stu, thank you so much for this great story and for talking about it with us. Can't wait to see you again soon.
My pleasure.
Once again, we're paying a disproportionate amount of attention to Mark Zuckerberg, who made a big announcement this week about a change in fact-checking practices at Meta, the parent company of Facebook. Carrie Monahan, a Brooklyn-based writer and producer, and also an old hand at Meta's fact-checking department, is here to explain exactly what it all means, if anything. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you for having me.
So, Carrie, Mark Zuckerberg's announcement about the end of fact-checking on Facebook garnered a lot of attention this week. But my question for you is, how much fact-checking were they really doing anyway in the first place?
So just as context, I worked as a third-party fact-checker for what was then known as Facebook and Instagram between late 2019 and mid-2021. When I was there was a lot of fact-checking going on. I mean, I can personally attest to it. I was doing, depending on how complicated the claim was, 1 to 2 a day. And the fact-checking was quite rigorous. It was really like reporting, and the fact checks themselves then had to be fact-checked and copy edited. But in terms of, how much fact-checking was Facebook itself doing compared to its third-party fact-checkers, not a lot and not enough. So in a sense, I wasn't really surprised by Mark Zuckerberg's announcement. I don't really think that Facebook, now Meta, ever really cared about protecting its users from manipulation or deception. And maybe we can get a little bit more into that. I think the fact-checking project, while the fact-checkers themselves, myself included, produced a lot of good work and run rigorous research, it wasn't really ever more than kind of window dressing or a way to kind of appease or make themselves look good after the Cambridge Analytica revelations.
But Carrie, it almost feels like not only a Herculean task, but almost like an existential proposition in the first place. Like, how are you supposed to fact check a social media platform that people are posting on every minute? Tell me about some of the work that you did when you were working for Facebook that you felt like actually was really making a difference in terms of the kind of content that people are consuming.
That's the thing. I'm not sure I ever did make a difference. I went into this role while I was working at Reuters, and this was a very new partnership, I went in very idealistic. I had just graduated from journalism school, where we were told, and this is true, time and again, we're in this disinformation crisis and it's so great. You all want to be journalists and seek the truth and protect people from, being manipulated, and whether that means, doing accurate reporting or promoting media literacy. There are multiple ways to do that. But I think after, a year and a half of doing this, I felt completely disillusioned by it. And I don't think it really ever made much of a difference. And one reason for that is it's a very slow process, fact checking. It's supposed to be. You're supposed to be thorough. That's like the whole premise of it. It's difficult, for example, to prove a negative. There are some conspiracy theories that are so wild and detailed that it's just like, okay, I don't know what to say about that. There are other claims where, you can figure out this is missing context, or you can sort of do the reporting in reverse. But I think at the end of the day, you end up applying these fact checks through Meta, Facebook's own technology, and the users themselves, they don't really care that they're being fact-checked. I think in a way, some of them sort of see it as a badge of honor. The fact-checkers are onto me, these clear pawns of George Soros, they're suppressing secret information that I have about the deep state. But then there are lots of people who unwittingly share disinformation that I do think is sometimes helpful, but we're just so far beyond all of that I don't know. And it's Facebook's own fault or Meta's own fault that we're where we are.
To that point, I empathize with you because I feel like, you're trying to fix this one little corner of the house and the whole thing is also just being taken down. But because, after the attempted insurrection 4 years ago, you say there was a joint study by NYU and a university in France that found fake news on Facebook got 6 times more engagement than factual news during the 2020 election. So it does sort of prove your point. It's like people want it anyway, and it just keeps getting fed to them. And then how is someone like you, this sort of traffic cop in a highway that's got 45 lanes coming at you, going to control any traffic, right?
Right. I'm thinking back to my own experience because I was a third-party fact checker during the insurrection. I went into this role, right before COVID. I think the announcement of the partnership was, while the Diamond Princess cruise ship was being quarantined, and then everything just kind of unraveled from there. So I was a fact checker during COVID. So during all the sort of the disinformation there about it, the pandemic, and just wild, bogus medical advice that was really dangerous. Then the murder of George Floyd and its aftermath, and just sort of this avalanche of, historical revisionism rooted in white supremacy that was super scary. Even also like false claims that George Floyd was at his own funeral, and after that, obviously the election and all of the fraud claims. I did a fact check saying, this is a video of ballots being dumped in a desert in Arizona. And it was actually an old video of like expired chicken being dumped in Saudi Arabia, just like crazy. And there's just so much of it.
That study that said fake news gets more engagement. So, of course you're going to feel powerless.
It's hard to tell if it's Facebook's own algorithms that kind of reward users, accounts who share disinformation, or is it the users themselves? Because disinformation is often much more polarizing. It causes much more emotion. It's not rooted in fact, right? People like to engage with that. I think that that's sort of natural, and disinformation, especially when it's intentional or conspiratorial, like people like to engage with that more than they like to engage with a factual news post, because it spurs, an emotional reaction. So it's hard to tell like how much of it is Facebook's own technology rewarding those kinds of posts versus like human nature and users themselves who, unfortunately, at this point, don't have enough media literacy skills. And this is sort of where we're at, beyond Meta, beyond social media.
You spent your time in the belly of the beast. You've come out the other side seemingly unscathed. If you had to look at a post-fact-check world in social media and Meta, what would you say people reading should be aware of nowadays? You talk about media literacy.
That's a good question. And
we've rendered you speechless.
No. I mean, I think media literacy at this point is really the answer, because, and it should be taught in schools. Unfortunately, like, I don't think any of these social media companies really care about being arbiters of the truth or like regulating the information that is posted on their websites. And now we have an administration that thrives on sort of the dissemination of disinformation. And so nothing is going to happen there. In terms of like spotting fake news, I don't know. To me, I think now it's so second nature, but I sort of am lucky to have been educated in such a way that it seems obvious. However, like, I still sometimes fall for disinformation on social media, political disinformation in particular. I guess just always check. Always, if you see something, especially when something that surprises you or evokes like an intense emotional reaction, I would just Google it. Even things that look like real news sources, and news sources themselves can get things wrong too, obviously. I guess just always double check, especially if something it makes you think twice or surprises you. It might just be good reporting, but it also just there might be more research for you to do as a consumer. But it's hard because I don't think that the average person, one, has the time or the interest in doing that. I feel fearful about this community notes thing, in part because I'm wondering, what if people provide opposing community notes? Who decides which one is true? I don't really use Twitter, so I'm not super familiar with like how their community notes operate, but that worries me. Also, I just don't think that not to be like, oh, I'm not the average person, but I had this sort of thankless job as a fact checker after going to journalism school and doing basic investigative classes and reporting classes and all of that. And fact checking, it really is reporting. It's reporting in reverse, and it's very difficult, and it can be super tedious and time consuming. And a lot of my fact checks, as you'll read in the piece, involve calling and requesting comment from people, from historians to constitutional scholars to, I mentioned one time communicating with Tree Payne, who's Taylor Swift's publicist. Like, the average person isn't gonna, depending on how generous they are with their time, like some politician or constitutional scholar or Tree Payne isn't gonna answer your email about your community note. So that's like an obstacle that But then I think about Wikipedia, and I know when you're in school, you're always taught not to use Wikipedia as a secondary source, but just as a regular person consuming news or information, I use Wikipedia all the time. So I don't know, I'm just curious how it will work, but I'm certainly concerned.
Well, Carrie, thank you so much for explaining this all to us and giving us some new insight into this incredibly complicated issue.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Well, after all of that, I think we need a bit of levity in the episode. And just like that, we have David Camp here to tell us all about the latest and greatest developments in, of all things, Sesame Street. If there's one thing we can all agree on, Michael, it's that Sesame Street has fed the souls of Americans for decades and will continue to do so in its new iteration. And David is here to tell us all about what that means. David is a writer at large at Airmail and the author of several books, including the most pertinent to today's conversation, Sunny Days, the Children's Television Revolution That Changed America. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Lovely to be with you.
I mean, David, you wrote the book on Sesame Street. We really need you to make sense of what's going on with this show. I mean, the last time I watched it, I have to confess, it was several years ago and my children were smaller, but there were like 147 million seasons even back then. Where do we find ourselves now?
We find ourselves in the 55th season, and season number 56 is going to be very different, evidently, because for the last 10 years, Sesame Street has been basically underwritten by Warner Brothers Discovery. Well, it was actually just Warner Brothers and HBO and then Max. And since the 2022 merger of Discovery and Warner Brothers, I guess they've been doing a lot of slashing and dumping of assets. And now that reality has come to Sesame Street. So season 56, Sesame Workshop is going to have to find a new partner in making new episodes of Sesame Street.
I mean, how is Sesame Street not a success? I mean, when we were children, it was the only game in town.
Well, it was really unique because it started in 1969, and that was a real outlier time because it was kind of the peak of public buy-in to the common good, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. So that was a real strange but wonderful time in which the federal government funded half of Sesame Street with corporate and public donations covering the other half. That model has long ago eroded. And for a while, Sesame Workshop could be independent because of the revenue brought in by soft toys of Ernie and Bert and Elmo, and also video cassettes, things like that. But with the advent of streaming, there went the DVD and video revenue. And with the atomization of media, we have Nickelodeon and Disney and other things, Sesame Street, while still very important, just doesn't hold that vast space in kid culture that it once did.
I mean, David, this is so distressing. I mean, but that being said, the show still has its super fans, the three of us among them. Why do you think that it still occupies such an important place in the media landscape?
To this day, I don't think there's any brand that engenders more goodwill and positive feeling than Sesame Street, if you can even call it a brand. It's an American institution, and I think, Mr. Rogers has passed, and he was a sui generis one-off kind of thing. But Sesame Street endures, and Big Bird, Ernie and Bert, Grover, and now Elmo. These are like totems of American life. And I'm curious, Ashley, because your kids are kind of tween and younger, but did Sesame Street still hold importance to them when they were, 4, 5, 6 years old?
It's a great question, and it really did, and it's probably because my husband and I took that opportunity to rewatch the old seasons from the 80s that we used to love as children ourselves. So it was actually it was the only children's show actually to this day that I enjoyed watching with my children for that nostalgic reason. And then, they actually like the newer seasons as well. I was less taken with those, but they still had their charm.
There's an intelligence behind those episodes in that they're engineered to be watched by parents and kids alike. So I think that's part of what you're responding to is there's more care and preparation that goes into a Sesame Street episode than into what we would just call a generic children's entertainment program.
Indeed. David, in an ever-changing world, in which we now have 7-year-olds playing Fortnite, like there's something uniquely comforting about Sesame Street. I anticipate it's going to have a massive comeback in this new era.
I really hope so. But one thing that is a little disquieting is that the workshop itself has announced that they're now going to do away with the magazine format of the show, where, it's kind of this engaging patchwork of live action segments, Muppet segments, cartoon segments, musical segments. And they're going to go towards a central narrative for each episode, which is an intriguing choice. It may work out, but I also kind of love the magazine format.
I mean, do you think that could be a reaction to like the YouTube shortsification of the world?
Well, in a weird way, it seems backward because I thought that the short attention span ADHD thing would kind of help with the magazine format. I mean, in fact, Joan Gans Cooney, who created the show, modeled the original version of Sesame Street on Laugh-In, which was this late 60s variety show known for its rat-a-tat-tat pace. And so, I don't know, maybe it is just that you need a narrative to hook people now, but I'm surprised that preschoolers are considered people who need a narrative to hook them.
Well, David, thank you for imagining this brave new world of Sesame Street for us. And also, Michael, I think we have something new we can recommend to readers. I've never actually seen the first season of Sesame Street. I bet we would all enjoy that.
Oh, it's amazing. It's funny because it's no longer marketed to children. It was so kind of outre and raggedy and street that now when you seek that out on a video copy, it says, this is now considered for adult viewers because just the standards of children's programming today are maybe more, they're more like cushions on the corners of coffee tables now. But I love it. It's actually great television and everyone should watch it and you'll get joy out of it, I promise.
My final question for all three of us, who's your Sesame Street avatar?
I would say, for me, and he's a crossover guy into the Muppet Show, Kermit. Because Kermit was kind of melancholy. As funny as he was, he would sing, "It's Not Easy Being Green." And I love the depth of that character. You?
You even have to guess? It's obviously Miss Piggy.
Obviously. Yes.
Do you know me? Michael?
I know moi. Yes.
Well, I think David and I could be the two grouchy old men up in the balcony.
Well, that's Muppet Show, Mike. That's beyond the Sesame canon.
Well, wasn't Miss Piggy Muppet Show only as well? I'm not sure, but same difference. It's like Paul McCartney and Wings. It's a separate. It comes out of the same thing. Okay. I don't know. I'm probably Kermit's taken. I'm living in a trash can. I'm Oscar the Grouch.
Hell yes.
Misunderstood, but really wanting to be loved.
This could be a good costume party. Camp?
Yes, absolutely. I'm in. Why don't we do it in your place in London?
Fine. Just consider it done. Next time you guys come over, get ready.
I don't think they call it costume parties anymore. I think it's cosplay.
Well, it's fancy dress in London.
Yeah, these people love fancy dress. I can take you guys to the fancy dress shops and we'll get all hooked up. It'll really be something. We'll cover it in airmail.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
David, have a great week. Thank you again for this.
My pleasure.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Well, Michael, on that note, you could always go back and rewatch those first 2 seasons of Sesame Street. But if not, first we should talk about the Golden Globes and all the movies that were within, because I know you have some views on all of this stuff.
Yeah. Have you seen A Real Pain?
I haven't seen anything because none of these movies are out in the UK until January 24th for some inexplicable reason.
Okay, well, I'm not going to spoil it, but A Real Pain, it was, as you note in the Golden Globes, Kieran Culkin won for Best Actor in this film. It's a new film written and directed by Jesse Eisenberg, in which he and Culkin play 2 cousins who take a trip to Poland to see where their grandmother, a Holocaust survivor, grew up and what she left behind. Culkin is great in it. I would say, Ashley, one thing that just sort of like stuck in me, his performance goes from, it's a real showcase. He dominates the film, kind of goes from comedy to pathos. But what's kind of strange for me, and I said this to Brooke watching, like, there's a strong element of Roman Roy in this, the character he played in Succession, like just his delivery of lines, his mannerisms. I don't know if that was intentional or that's just the way Culkin sees it, but it doesn't detract from it. It was just sort of like, I'd be interested to know if other people see that. But I think one other thing, not to spoil it for you, actually, because you'll figure it out, but you get a nice appearance as well by Jennifer Grey. But it's a great movie. It's called A Real Pain. It's in theaters now and streaming, at least here in the U.S., on Apple and Amazon Prime. And you, my dear, what do you got? What are you thinking about?
Well, it's just, I guess I have just a bit of a rant about this because it seems to me now like these award shows are really feeling like exercises in marketing for these movies that maddeningly now I can't see. Like I'm now in the rest of the world, right? Not the US, where these things are not even out until, January or February. And you feel like everyone, you get a major case of FOMO. Like everyone's talking about the good movies without you. And it's a little bit infuriating. Like, is it going to help sales and drive business? Yes, but I don't know. It's like everything else. It's like fashion deliveries. I feel like there's a sense of timing that's not working to our advantage here.
Is the Bob Dylan movie there?
No, this is what I'm talking about. I can't even, it's just infuriating.
The Dylan movie, when is that coming out?
Okay, it's January 16th. It's opening, but like they're at one theater in Leicester Square. I can't even.
Wait, so I got another 10 days or 2 weeks before you and I can talk about it?
There's one showing. It's opening wide in London on Friday, January 17th. Useless. I know. I will say I do have another recommendation.
Yes.
Which is this. It's a general one, but it is the city of Florence. I've been to Florence as a student. I was there as a young adult. I've been there a couple of times in recent years. And I've always liked the city. We went again over New Year's. It gets this reputation for being over-touristed and full of kind of boring art museums. It is such an incredibly vibrant city. The food scene is exceptional. The museums, of course, are really wonderful, especially if you have the right guide. And if you need one, I can give you her name. She was wonderful. Thank you, Ariana. I think that city is like, Italy has so many superstars. And I think Florence is kind of relegated to the cultural back burner, but that's totally wrong. If you love shopping, if you love eating good food and drinking good wine and walking around, it's an incredibly vibrant and affordable place to do it. I mean, you can actually get 2 scoops of gelato for €3 in that town, Michael. Dinner for 2 costs no more than €100. So anyway, it was a real revelation for me. We took our children there and it was fun to see it through their eyes. But we love Venice, we love Rome, but don't leave out little Florence. Of course, it's busier in July and parts of August, but because of COVID and remote work, things have really changed the traffic patterns in cities like that. So it wasn't completely dead, but I think that was a good thing because it, even in the first few days of January, which can also often feel a bit depressing, Florence still had its holiday lights up and the streets were still bustling and the museums were open and it still had that kind of festive spirit. So I really recommend it for anyone looking for a place to go that is an incredibly affordable alternative, frankly, to the beaches and the islands and the Caribbean that are so exorbitant at that time of year.
Book it.
Book it. Well, on that note, we wish you all a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining us. Happy 2025. Michael, will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan, and our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julia Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. Our theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly, but we will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting. And in the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thank you again for joining us.